Did you know? In Metal Gear Solid, the prison cell guard gave Meryl more toilet paper than he gave the DARPA chief. According to developers, it's because he was more considerate of the lady. It's worth highlighting that 9 years later, that same guard, Johnny Sasaki, got hitched with Meryl in MGS4. The devil had eyes on her from the very beginning. And it all started with making sure her bog roll was well stocked. Fellas, let that be a lesson to you. I'm David Hayter, the voice of Solid Snake. That TP guard tidbit was revealed in Metal Gear Solid Integral, which was sort of like a special edition of the game released in Japan. Integral featured about 400 codec calls from the developers with behind-the-scenes details that have never been translated into English until this video. Some have never been heard before except by Japanese fans. Today, we're going to level the playing field and highlight 40 of our favorite codecs, revealing cut content, hard-to-find secrets, Easter eggs, and even some developer stories. We'll start at the beginning and work our way forward chronologically. In one of the first integral codecs, system administrator Yoshikazu Matsuhana says the original plan for the heliport area was that Snake would have to get around by hiding in the shadow of a moving forklift, but the sequence ended up getting scrapped. The forklift still made it into the game though. It's sitting idle in the back corner of the dock area. Most fans probably never even noticed it was there. The team had big plans for that forklift, but it was ultimately demoted to just being a decoration. Speaking of the heliport, the sound director says if you stand by the cliff's edge, you can hear the sound of waves. You can't see the waves, and they're meant to be far below, so you can just barely hear them. But it's an in-game detail most players would never find on their own. These calls are scattered all over the game. In Integral, you can call codec frequency 140.07 whenever you want, and the staff will tell you something interesting. One's about the codec itself. The programming director says the static when you talk to them, and also when you're talking to Deep Throat, is actually binary code from the game's programming forcibly pasted in as textures. When it's time to find the DARPA chief, you can actually see him about 10 minutes before you're supposed to by manipulating the camera. The devs knew it was possible, so they added a special chime to reward players who found the secret. On his way to meet the chief face-to-face, Snake has to crawl through some air ducts. Looking down, you can see a soldier who appears to be using the latrine.
I hate Alaska. Boy, oh boy, that woman is built all right.
But the devs say this genome soldier's not peeing or pooping. He's just avoiding doing his job. Slacking, quiet quitting. When you finally find the DARPA chief, one of the pixel artists points out you've already seen him without realizing it. Remember the submarine cutscene at the very beginning? The chief was actually reused as one of the sailors. You can see him right here. Recycling him saved a little time and money. After eavesdropping on Snake and the chief's chat, Meryl knocks out the guard. Again, that's her future husband, and steals his clothes. One of the scriptwriters says, quote, "Don't you want to get a closer look at Johnny Sasaki passed out in his underwear? Get as close as you can facing him and then crouch. Look how the camera angle changes. We call it the sexy rear cam." In some international releases, including the American version, Johnny, in nothing but his nut huts, was changed to him being buck naked with his Johnson blurred. So sadly, some of y'all won't be able to get the full sexy rear cam experience for yourselves. Moving on. Right before the fight with Ocelot, he'll twirl his revolver for 10 or 15 seconds. According to animator Nobuyoshi Nishimura, he originally spun it a lot longer. So long, in fact, that everyone else on the dev team was cracking up from the absurdity. "You can't take things too far," he said, and made it less absurd by shortening the scene. It's worth noting that in Metal Gear Solid 3, Ocelot introduces himself with a full 30 seconds of gun twirling. Apparently, with time, they learned to embrace the absurdity. When fighting against the tank, it fires a shell and Snake flip jumps out of the way. That wasn't actually supposed to happen, but in a way, it gave birth to the Snake we know and love. According to animator Nishimura, the scene where Snake jumps to avoid a shot from the M1 tank came from art director Shinkawa's storyboard. However, in the storyboard, he just rolled out of the way, but I misread it and I thought Snake did a cool jump to dodge it, so that's the animation I made. I was told, it looks cool, so we'll leave it in. And I think that kicked off the beginning of Snake getting a bunch of flashy animations. During the tank battle, they say if you dodge the first 6 shots but get hit by the 7th, Raven gives you a different cutscene. Here's the normal cutscene when Snake gets hit. And here's the scene if you get hit by the 7th shell. Soon after, you can do a camera trick to spot Otacon earlier than intended, just like the DARPA chief. Again, the devs treat you to a secret chime. After that, you have to guide a remote-controlled missile over an electric floor. One dev says this part was originally a lot harder, but they toned down the difficulty later in development. He also asks the player to see what happens if Snake gets electrocuted when he's in the cardboard box. This is what the normal animation looks like. And this is the animation the dev wanted us to see, box and all. In another call, they encourage us to see what happens if Snake falls into a pit while he's wearing a box. Again, here's the normal animation. And now, the box version. As you approach your first fight with Cyber Ninja, in the hall full of dead soldiers, you can hear some strange intonations. According to the sound director, that was Hideo Kojima's idea, and it's supposed to be Ninja reciting the names of certain railway stations in Kansai, Japan. Those particular stations all had nice rings to them, and I think they match Ninja's Japanese image. During the fight, one of the programmers says he made attacks where Ninja shoots beams from his eyes, and another where he splits into 3, so Snake has to battle 3 ninjas at once. But ultimately, both of those attacks got scrapped. Although the cloning attack was kind of repurposed for the Pain in MGS3, whom they made split into 2. After every boss battle, Snake does a strange gesture as he regenerates his health. According to animator Nishimura, this action had the most troubled development of any animation in the game. Countless other animations got rejected, and with so few results to show for her time, all her colleagues thought she was a slacker. It's kinda hard to make out what Snake's actually doing when he regenerates, so in 2021, Nishimura tweeted some clarification, saying it's supposed to be Snake clenching his fists with all his strength. In the next cutscene, Otacon tells Snake he can deduce which soldier is Meryl in disguise due to her feminine form.
She had such a cute way of walking. She kind of wiggles her behind.
You were really looking.
Well, she's got a very cute behind.
Way of walking, huh?
The devs say that butt-wiggling animation was called catwalk, and likewise the animation for Snake accepting a codec call was honey flash. At that same point in the game, the programming director says Otacon had a secret anime room that got scrapped. Quote, "At first, there was a way to get from under Otacon's desk to a hidden room where he stashed his anime merch. The models and textures were all complete, but it ultimately got rejected for various reasons, unfortunately."
Call me Otacon.
Otacon?
It stands for Otaku Convention. And otaku's a guy like me who likes Japanimation.
When Snake's going through the wolf caves, the sound director says, if you wear the cardboard box here, the dogs might pee on you. There are a lot of situations involving pee and poop in Metal Gear Solid. You could think of it as Hideo Kojima's long-held hobby. In your first sniper shootout with Wolf, the sound director chimes back in to say you can shoot the rats scampering around. But they couldn't come up with a good squeak effect, so they reused the rat sounds from the back alleys in Police Knots, the previous Kojima game, which released in 1994 but never left Japan. Side by side, you can hear they're the same. When Sniper Wolf captures Snake, one of the animators says, I had to change these animations to avoid model clipping, but in the process, the sexiness got blown out of proportion. Snake got to touch Wolf and probably got a peek at her breasts, so he must have been happy. Following Snake's harrowing escape from his cell, he's pursued by Liquid in a Hind D. A programmer says bullets raining down were supposed to intensify the player's hatred for the chopper. But the dev laments that in the final game, the damage-dealing steam turned out to be more annoying than the bullets. So unfortunately, the sequence actually intensified the player's hatred for steam instead of the Hind. After blowing up Liquid in his chopper and wandering around in the snow a bit, a dev call asks you if you noticed the parachute in the ditch, foreshadowing the later reveal that Liquid survived the explosion. Finding it in first person triggers a very brief cutscene and a codec call.
Colonel, listen to me. I found a parachute near the wreckage of the Hind.
A parachute? You don't think that Liquid survived?
Impossible. As soon as he jumped out of the pilot's seat, he'd be sliced up faster than an onion on an infomercial.
Moving on to Disc 2. When you're going down on the elevator, or I think technically it might be a funicular, one of the programmers explains that it's not actually moving. Instead, an optical illusion was created by scrolling the surrounding textures up and down. They also say this part of the game was inspired by a certain movie, almost certainly a nod to Akira, the 1988 cyberpunk anime classic, which included a very similar scene. Another call says their homage was beaten to the punch mid-development by a competing video game, probably Resident Evil 2, which also has a similar scene and released 8 months earlier. The Metal Gear team thought about cutting the elevator sequence when they realized their thunder had been stolen, but ultimately decided to leave it in. Careful around all that fire. According to animation dev Nishimura, if you get too close to the blast furnace, Snake will slip and fall in. The animation for slipping came out great, like he stepped on a banana peel. But later, when we got into debugging, we couldn't get it to trigger anywhere. Why? Why? It turned out the animation got cut earlier in development. The hangar housing Metal Gear Rex is 3 stories tall. Call the devs within, and a scenery modeler says they struggled with consistency here in Shadow Moses' largest set piece. If you look at the floor on 1F, it looks one way, but if you look down at the same floor from 3F, it looks different. Whoops. Also in the hangar, there's a cutscene where Snake eavesdrops on Ocelot and Liquid while they very loudly explain their evil plans. Animator Shimizu says she was real proud of her work here, but the rest of the team laughed at her for how she made Ocelot so fast and skillful on a keyboard. Old men in the 90s did not type that fast, especially after their right hand gets cut off. When it's time to duke it out with Liquid mano a mano, enemy logic programmer Yuji Korikado says the fight's stupidly hard on extreme difficulty, which was implemented with hardcore American players in mind. In fact, the entirety of MGS1 was harder in America. In Japan, the original release only had one difficulty setting, equivalent to the American Easy mode. Art director Yoji Shinkawa asks us to see what happens if Snake keeps calling Mei Ling but never saves. At first, it's no big deal.
Talk to you later, Snake.
But after a few pointless calls, she gets annoyed.
Come on, Snake, don't call me for no reason.
Eventually, she stops talking and just makes funny faces. Yoji Shinkawa is the guy who designed Metal Gear Rex. In another call, he says they didn't consider how Rex would walk until after the design was already finished, which gave him some trouble. Ultimately, they decided to have it stand on its tiptoes and fold in its heels. Also, Nishimura says the claws on Rex's feet dig into the ground when they settle, but it can't be seen on screen, so it's more like an invisible but canonical design detail. Metal Gear Solid has 2 endings, one with Otacon and one with Meryl. In the first, animator Yoshimura says she was instructed, presumably by Kojima, to make Otacon's unsteady footing on the snowy hill look like a comedy routine. She also says when Otacon sees the snowmobile, he giddily exclaims, "The snowmobile!" like a childish otaku, shattering the somber tone because he's a silly, silly man. That line appears to have gotten cut, though, and covered up by Naomi's monologue. His talking animation's still left in, but he got muted. Probably for the best.
That's how all life works. Loving each other, teaching each other.
And in the other ending, pixel artist Nakamura says, Meryl's wearing an orange vest in the final scene. Does it look familiar? The design's a little different, but it looks a lot like the vest Dave wears in Police Knots. Try to let your imagination run wild. Meryl was actually in Police Knots before Metal Gear, and Dave was her partner in the Vice unit. Here come Police Knots spoilers, so skip ahead 15 seconds if you don't want to hear them. But maybe the implications that she took it off Dave after he died. His dying words were that he loved the way she smelled after all. There are Police Knots references all over Metal Gear, but the games don't really exist in the same canon universe. Well, mostly anyway. Also in that ending cutscene, Snake and Meryl see a caribou with its young, which are meant to drive home the theme of passing on your genes. Yoshimura says she worked like a dog to animate natural, believable movements for those 2 caribou. It's the final scene after all, so she wanted to make it perfect and redid it again and again. But then she screwed up and deleted all her work, leaving her pale as a sheet. So the caribou that made it into the final game didn't look nearly as good. After beating the game, you're rewarded with a bandana you can wear for infinite ammo. On the development team, they called it seaweed because of how it sways in the wind, like seaweed underwater. So if you want to look cool at a Metal Gear party, don't call it a bandana, call it seaweed. I'm David Hayter, and I'll be back soon with more newly translated Metal Gear content. So subscribe if you don't want to miss it. DidYouKnowGaming got a hold of Kojima's Sons of Liberty diary. 14 dense pages never translated before. Some juicy stuff in there. If you're looking for something to watch right now, though, check out this hour-long video I narrated about the Metal Gear series cut content. Special thanks to BadHumans for providing the raw Japanese codecs, Jacob for translating, and Eurasia M for footage capture. And thank you for watching. See you next time.